Chapter 6. Taking Flight. I'm sure that each of us, in our quieter moments, glances back down the highway of our life and wonders about the off-ramps that we took. I often question the signposts of fate, fear, or just plain fickleness that motivated me to veer into the fast lane, stay comfortable in the middle, or take a rapid exit. But I never even thought about the sign that steered me onto my psychic highway until I was asked numerous times, "How did you become a psychic?" Since I had joined an airline 6 months previously, in May of 1974, my life had already changed drastically for the better. Detesting my lot, working as a temp for a London secretarial agency for 2 years, I had been encouraged by both friends and relative strangers to pursue a new career as an air stewardess. How had people who barely knew me recognized that the life of a gypsy was my perfect niche? I loved my new lifestyle, flying short-haul routes all over Europe. I loved the lack of routine. I loved the people, crew and passengers. I loved being able to use my knowledge of French, German and Italian. I even loved everything about planes, including the dirty diesel smell of the tugs that brought in a just-landed aircraft. Love had also found me. It was because of Tom, my new, gentle and funny boyfriend, that I decided to move from London to Crawley. I now shared a large, comfortable, neo-Georgian house with my 2 friends and flatmates, Sheila and Debbie, both stewards flying for the same airline. I was living within dating distance of Tom now and 20 minutes from the airport. Instead of being miserable and lost, I was finally happy and excited about life again. Ironically, I had always believed that at the age of 22 I would die, but my life was just taking off. Must be a memory of a past life, I decided. Of course, all was not perfect. My parents had finally, after 5 years of vacillating between loving reconciliations and trying to kill each other, got divorced. The seeds of the future are often hidden in the present, and anyone who is awake could have perceived their drifting apart long before the final battle came. My mother, as I glibly diagnosed, had gone crazy. She was still scrawnily thin, still substituting nutrition for gin and tonics, and appropriately giant bars of Cadbury fruit and nut chocolate. She now spent her days screaming accusations of betrayal at anybody and everybody who would listen, mostly me, because I was there, either in person or on the phone, and she cried and cried and cried. Feeling helpless and totally inept, I tried to rescue my mother from her misery with inane suggestions like, "You're free now, just think of the possibilities." But she wanted or needed to wallow in the injustice of it all. Still unpredictably switching between her former bright, chatty self and her more recent hysterically vengeful, scorned personality, my mother was now a scary stranger to me. My grandmother, as much as I adored her, didn't help. She constantly validated my mother's belief that she was a victim. "It's all Charles' fault," they both moaned. "All men are bastards. They all cheat and lie. They only want one thing," and on it went. I didn't know where my father was, and I really didn't care at that time. My memories were always of him enraged, shouting at me, at all of us, especially at Mark, my eldest brother. He was lost in his own world, his brooding, detached, escapist silences, his only defense against the chaotic family in which he, through his choices or fate, had found himself. Whether it was my grandmother's influence or my own questioning of who or what was culpable for all our pain, I chose to blame my father for the emotional bomb that had dropped on our family, sending us all devastated, scattering in opposite directions, and shattering my mother into 1,000 tiny little pieces, like Humpty Dumpty, never to be put back together again. My 4 siblings not only made themselves scarce, as if our mother had contracted Ebola, but also didn't want to talk about it, as if the disintegration of our family wasn't really happening. I realized that this nutty clan of mine wasn't my only motivation for studying psychology and metaphysics. My pursuit of knowledge was also a necessary defense against my own suspected encroaching insanity. I was like a 4-year-old with my unceasing whys. What made people tick? Okay, what made my mother tick? Why did bad things happen to good people, like my mother? Why was my family so cruel, especially my mother? Why had this happened to my parents? What had caused my mother's insanity? Was it the pain of my father's betrayal, or had that triggered something deeper? Was it punishment or fate? I wanted to know if a person's upbringing dictated their future life, or, as my grandmother would have it, was my mother merely a victim of circumstance? So even I knew that my motivation for burying myself in books on numerology, pop psychology, or any other available illuminating information I could get my hands on was my own search for answers. Although the world appeared to function out of chaos, and people talked as if life was something that happened to them, I sensed another truth. Behind the apparent randomness of events, good or bad, there was a rhythm, a pulse, a plan, or at least a capitalist plot. But it was a secret, and like a code, had to be deciphered. If I just kept digging, I thought, the mystery of the silent, powerful mechanism that ruled our lives would eventually be solved. I would not only be able to make order out of the chaos in my life, but I would also understand other people's motivations. Like the Lone Ranger off to rescue Tonto, I decided I would unravel the mystery of the universe. But there was no one to teach me, except everyone, life, and books. I threw myself into self-help writings and metaphysics like Your Erroneous Zones, or was it Erogenous, by Wayne Dyer, the I Ching, and the back pages of women's magazines, where dear somebody solved everybody's problems. Then a magical thing happened. A little tattered purple paperback landed in my hands. The book was called The Complete Book of Palmistry by Joyce Wilson. It changed my life. I couldn't know the huge impact that this little book filled with fine print and numerous diagrams would have upon me. And to this day I couldn't tell you why that book hooked me like a gambler to a casino, except that it spoke to me. Palmistry, after all, is a hugely elaborate science. The information took time to absorb. I would periodically grab people's hands while avoiding getting arrested, study the lines, then have to revisit the text and the diagrams. As the author kept making references to astrology, I found a copy of Sun Signs by Linda Goodman. And though I bought into the basic premise of astrology, that each planet in our universe emits its own vibrations, and we mere mortals are subject to their influences, I wasn't attracted to learning all its complexities. Maybe astrology just wasn't personal enough, and I had made my choice, palmistry. As a flight attendant in the Roaring '70s, I was definitely a people person. Not only did I, for some insane reason, love the challenge of dealing with often insufferably rude passengers and interesting travellers, I also immensely enjoyed my fun, adventurous colleagues. Consequently, Tom and I just had to attend a lot of parties. It went with the territory. It was at these free-spirited gatherings, yes, a lot of the spirits were free, though customs never did find out, I began my apprenticeship as a palmist. While airline staff talked endlessly in airline lingo about their eventful flights, wacko passengers, idiosyncratic captains, and scary incidents, boring anyone who did not work around airplanes, I would indulge in my palm reading ability on woolly-minded and willing victims. The correlation between the shape of people's hands and their personalities fascinated me. As I peered into the person's outstretched palms, I proceeded to point out prominent personality characteristics and future events. I don't know what I'm doing, so don't live by it, was my regular preamble. But some of the faces of my victims would turn pale, or their pupils would become enlarged, and they exclaimed, "How did you know that?" Their reaction was often incredulity, almost accusatory, as if I was a spy with MI5 or had been interrogating their close friends and family. I just shrugged, amazed but pleased that I had hit upon some hidden truth. "I don't know, it just comes," I slurred unscientifically, partially proud of myself, partially a little unnerved. How did I know? Was it luck? Coincidence? I had no idea. The feelings and the information just came to me. As my readings were limited in content at that time, it did not occur to me that I might be psychic. For me, my palm reading was a very hit and miss affair, probably missing much more than hitting. As most people believed then, and many still do, I thought that in order to be clairvoyant, one had to possess special powers. Psychic definitely wasn't a word I used to describe myself. But even in those early days, I remember a certain integrity that went with the territory, an unspoken command not to say anything that I did not see or that was not the truth. Sometimes I would simply respond to the person asking the question with, "I don't know." The lines on the hand were to me indicators of the personality type and the person's future potential. The major lines were also varied in length, shape, form, and strength, with such a myriad of nuanced interpretations that I believed it would take 1,000,000 years to become a proficient palmist. I wasn't far wrong, but I also knew that if I studied palmistry long and profoundly enough, it would take me to a deeper truth, that of the universe and its workings. It would be another 13 years before I would understand the process and could, without an ounce of doubt, say, "By George, I think I've got it. I am psychic." But at that time my question was, do I need to be psychic to see? Or could I just know someone's innermost mind and their future from reading the lines on their hands? I wanted to understand it all, especially how a psychic could see. Fate must have heard my question, because it wasn't long before I would have my first experience with a real psychic.